Okay. Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with a sort of like a balance video this time, I guess. This is not something I normally do. I think it's going to be something I'm going to do a lot more. I may even make another channel for it where I keep balance and like thoughts about games on one channel and then use the current channel more for like build guides and stuff like that. And then I'm probably going to be making an entirely new channel for my clips and stuff like that from other games so they don't interfere with the PoE stuff potentially. But regardless of that, I did want to talk about Hierophant here because I feel like, if anything, I am kind of uniquely in a position where I'm uniquely able to comment on Hierophant, right? Not as in like I'm the only person that can comment on Hierophant, but I feel like this ascendancy doesn't get a ton of play, especially when we're talking about totem play specifically. And I was just kind of like browsing Reddit the other day, and I seen people talking about the different ascendancy buffs, quote unquote, and there's some people who definitely seem to understand like what I'm about to say here. So I don't want to say that like this is I'm like the first person to like notice this or anything like that, because there were definitely some totem people in the Reddit comments for sure talking about this. But I think there was some type of there was a lot of pushback even against those people, like by people who just don't really seem to understand what's going on or like why this is, in my opinion, a nerf to totems. Pretty clear nerf. They don't think it's a big deal, and yeah, so I'll be kind of going into that a bit. I guess there's like three main areas, right, where this is a clear downgrade for me, and some of them are more important than others, and I don't necessarily. I think I'm gonna start with. I'll try and go order of importance to some extent, right? And yeah, I'm just going to be basically talking about why, regardless of what you might think of this ascendancy for other things, like maybe you saw this and you were like, oh, this is exciting because they buffed some of the other nodes in the tree, and that's fine. But I think for totems in particular, which is a big part of this ascendancy, at least, I know it's not the only thing you can do, but it's it's kind of like a staple for totem builds. This is definitely a nerf, and there's a lot of people that don't seem to realize it, even though there are people that do realize it, and I'm going to point out why. And, yeah. So, Pursuit of Faith, first of all, there's a lot of people that seem to think that this is, it's like somehow not a nerf, because I think they're saying like you get more placement speed now. We can go check. I booted up the game here just because I want to be able to have the numbers. Probably would have been maybe easier to just put up a new thing. But so the current, there's no placement speed on this, right? I think the middle nodes are the same. You can't see them in the other thing. This gives 50% placement speed. So you get basically 50% more placement speed than you would if you had taken this whole chain. And you get like 100% more than if you took just this node. Now, I do think if you're trying to do something that's not like a pure totem build but would make use of totems, this is definitely a super good change in the sense that you're getting a lot of value out of this one node, right? But in terms of for a pure totem build, you're actually like losing a ton, in my opinion, because if you pull this back up, you're losing the attack and cast speed, which 10% cast speed is nothing to scoff at. And you're losing the 6% increased damage per enemy killed by you or your totems recently. And in my opinion, like, that's fucking huge. Especially the totems being like an auto-target build, and you can have like a lot of them down at once. You can easily get like 40 stacks of this. This is in like lower level stuff, right? Like if you have a good build that like is really strong and deals with density really well, you can get this like 80, 90. You know what I mean? Like you get so much damage from this node on trash, And in one sense, you would be like, okay, it doesn't really matter because trash tends to not be a big issue in this game. But I would kind of disagree about that. I think that, especially like nowadays, given the state that the game's in, trash damage can definitely be somewhat important. You know, like when you're thinking of things like Simulacrum, when you're thinking of things like the Timeless Jewel stuff, if you're going to run that event, the Delirium, right? Like even Blight stuff, like the Blighted maps, like all this stuff. A lot of the mobs can be very resilient if you're running them at like high levels. And this type of like damage boost, you can really feel it. This was definitely a consideration. I play a lot of totem builds in this channel, and a lot of them tend to be like I've tried to actually do a lot of totem builds. Like I've done some with Inquiz, you know, I've done some with Deadeye before and stuff like that. I've done actually some with Champion, I believe, or whatever the taunt one is down here. So I've done totem builds with quite a few things on the tree. I've done one with Elementalist before, but typically, especially nowadays, what you would do with a totem build is you would either go Hierophant or you would go Ascendant, right? Those are your two options. And it's basically coming down to, like, how well can your build benefit from, like, certain things on the Ascendant cluster? And, like, do you want Leech or not? I think if you're doing, like, a fire totem build that you want to Leech on, it's almost like surely you go Ascendant. I've also done Chieftain totem build as well. But yeah, I would say mainly it's down to Ascendant and Hierophant, right? And this is actually a really big argument for going Hierophant because you really feel this damage. And the other build, like Ascendant in general, especially if you're not going Fire, so you're not really benefiting from the enemy's cover in ash thing, you're losing damage for sure. You are just losing damage. You're getting other things, and it might be fine, but you're definitely losing damage. I remember trying to do an arc build with Ascendant. It's like, you know, obviously, and keep in mind, you can juice this build to make it like super good, right? But, you know, as Hierophant, you can run a budget arc build, and it can actually get like arc totem build, and it can get you like really, really far. Especially with the way it clears, this node comes into play huge on trash and stuff like that. Now, trying to play the same build as Ascendant, you would notice not only the overall lack of damage, but particularly what you were missing from Pursuit of Faith, right? And now this is just gone. It's just like I have no idea why they took it out. It's actually huge. I'm not sure if they realize how big it is, honestly. But it's really, really fucking good, and I have no idea why they would ever remove that at all. Like, if anything, like, I think with the placement speed on this, maybe they felt the node would be overloaded. You can even take the cast speed out, but don't take the 6% damage per enemy killed out, you know? If you need to, shift this to Ritual of Awakening or something like that. I mean, you can make it totem only. They might have been scared of that. I think if you... I think that considering how they buffed some of these other nodes for things that are not necessarily totems, maybe that was a concern of theirs. They would be overpowered if you could just put 2 points, snag this, and then grab some other stuff here, right? But if you need to, just fucking nest that shit in Ritual of Awakening. Like, yeah, it might seem kind of like an overloaded node, but I mean, you don't want this gone. Like, this is a distinct advantage of playing this over something like Scion. You know what I mean? And we haven't seen the new Scion Ascendant yet, but unless it's buffed... Well, here's the weird thing, right? It's like, if it's nerfed, that's the only way I feel like this is going to get a lot of play as a Totem Ascendancy, is if the Scion stuff is nerfed. And you don't want that, because if the Scion stuff is nerfed, then the build overall is just completely nerfed, right? Like, right now, I think it makes a lot more sense to go Scion, and I'm going to explain why, not only with this, but with other stuff. But I think it makes a lot more sense to go Scion, and there's just no... If Scion is also nerfed, there's almost, I feel like, no reason to play totems in a lot of cases. Yeah, so... Let me... And if Scion's buffed, like let's say they buff Scion, they make the totem stuff better there, then there's really no reason to play this, right? So if Scion is basically the same or buffed, then there's no reason to play Hyro in a lot of cases. And if Scion's nerfed, then you might play Hyro if you want to play totems, but it's like, why would you play totems? So that's kind of like the problem, right? And this is huge. Like, missing this is, like, I can't understand, like, I feel like they just must not play totem builds whatsoever. They must not realize, like, how much damage is actually added in practice when you're kind of, like, running through a map. It is so underrated. Even I know, like, people who play totem builds, they don't, or if I tell my friends to play a totem build, play Hyro, they discount this node so hard, and it's actually so fucking good. In one sense, maybe you could say it's, okay, like, so that sounds like what you're saying, Tox, is that it's too good, right? And I can kind of see that, except the problem is that totems in general are not in a very good place at all, in my opinion. You know, especially like you can twink them out with the Assyria's Mirror and stuff like that, and the belts, and you know, you can invest a lot in them, and they can be pretty decent. But, you know, if you invest a lot in pretty much anything in this game, given how they've allowed things to scale nowadays, it can be pretty decent, right? So I don't really like to use that as like a metric. I think if totems were just like shitting on everything on like a super low budget or something like that, that would be cause for concern. That's not what's happening here. So, yeah. So there's that node. That's what I wanted to talk about first. Now, I'm going to save, I think, Ritual of Awakening for last, because there's a lot to kind of go into there, but Conviction of Power. This is a straight-up nerf in terms of totems, at least. There might be other things you can do with it, kind of like weird niche things, but for most applications, for a totem build, it's a straight-up nerf, because there was no problem maintaining your charges ever. So there's just no, if we go back to see like what the original build is, minimum power, minimum endurance, and then +1, okay? So the problem, though, is that there's no need for to have minimum charges to begin with at all, because it just, like, it was never a problem to maintain them. Even on a boss, there was no situation where I wasn't at, like, whatever my max charge count was. So this node, basically, to me, is 4% extra physical mitigation, which isn't terrible, and like 30% more crit, or whatever it is, because +1/+1, right? So that's what this node is to me now. And what we're losing, if we go back to this, is 5% reduced elemental damage taken, and then 5% penetration. Now, one power charge is not covering 5% penetration. Not even close. And you are gaining more physical mitigation, but you're losing elemental mitigation. This is not a good trade-off overall. I would even concede that this build maybe wants physical mitigation more than elemental mitigation, but it's still a nerf overall because you're losing damage, and you're trading one source of mitigation for the other, and it's kind of like debatable on which one you want more. In a lot of cases, like, sure, I would say that the physical one matters more, but it's 4%. You're trading 4% or 5% elemental for, 4% phys. It's not like an insane value there. You know what I mean? If you still had the damage, like the 5% pen, and then you just had the removed elemental damage taken, I could say that you could say it's a slight buff, but even then it's not like a buff really, right? It's just like, and I've seen people characterize this in a very weird way. They say, like, what they'll do is they'll list the raw value that you're getting from 4 endurance charges. So let's say like 16% phys mitigation, the amount of resistances, and what is it, like 120% crit, I think, because it's 30% for each charge. And like all that in one node. Plus before it was the reduced and damage taken and the damage penetrates, and they're like, that's OP, and it's like, well, not really, because you can get the charges, is the thing. This made it easier to get the charges, right? Specifically for it made the build play smoother, but you could get the charges. It was not, most builds can get, like, a lot of builds, like, you're not, the ascendancy isn't, like, it's not considered like a big chunk of power to have your ascendancy interact with the charges, usually. We wouldn't say that about, like, other ascendancies. They make it easier to maintain. They make the playstyle of your build easier. Like, oh, like, they're so powerful, they're giving you just the raw stats of the charges. Like, that's not how we would really look at it, because you can get the charges in other ways. So I think that's, like, a very misleading, like, I understand why people jump to that when they're trying to find, like, rationalizations for the nerf, but there's no rationalizations for this. This is just, like, idiotic. This is really bad, from GGG. It just is what it is. There's no redeeming, I see what they wanted to do here. It's like, no, this is just fucking dog shit. So there's that, and then Ritual of Awakening. So this one, a lot of people are looking at this, and I don't like it either. I think in some ways, this is the most egregious nerf, Pursuit of Faith. This one is, it's not necessarily as bad as people would think, but I do not like it for a couple reasons. Okay, so first of all is that it feels like they're forcing you to use the totem support, which I always thought it was a really cool thing of, like, hey, we're giving this implicitly to Hyro, because this is the totem ascendancy, but we're giving you a gem where if you kind of want to do something a little wacky, like, you have the ability to get this, but there's going to be a trade-off. That's what I love about PoE. It's trade-offs, right? And I think totems are, like, an excellent example in general of trade-offs in this game. I don't know if you guys have really built totem stuff much, but there's, like, building totems in general is, like, all about trade-offs. Like, especially, like, Hierophant versus, like, Ascendant and stuff like that, right? Like, there's reasons why you might want to go one versus the other, and there's a genuine trade-off in each case. And I feel like it's weird that they nerf things like this, because there's a lot of other builds in this game that are just straight up overpowered. There's no trade-off whatsoever, really. Like, no meaningful trade-off. There's a lot of cases where, like, one ascendancy is, like, hyper dominant for them. There's virtually no reason to go a different ascendancy, and that shit's just fine. They don't care about that. It's like, oh, yeah, sure, like, you can keep this overpowered shit in the game. Totems, not even that powerful at all, actually kind of makes you think on some level about how you want to build it. I mean, I would say for most new players, you're definitely going to want to go Hyro, especially if you're just starting the game or if you're just starting a league. Like, Hyro is by far the easiest thing to do, and therefore you're going to see Hyro be most popular. But I think people really sleep on Ascendant in general, and some of the things you can do with it and how good the leech can be. So there was definitely trade-offs there, you know what I mean? And they're just making it so that now you have to use this thing, like, all the time for a lot of builds. This totem support gem, the multiple totem one. So that's, like, the first thing I don't like about it, I think, and like, one of the main things, because technically, damage-wise, it's going to depend on your build. First of all, like, this is going to be one that's hard to broad brush, but, like, for my Freezing Pulse build, for example, putting multiple totem in might be more overall damage, okay? So, like, because first of all, you have to remember, you are gaining 2 extra totems. Now, every time you add a totem, you are gaining less of like a overall percentage of your damage per each individual totem added, right? That is true, but still adding another totem is a whole nother source of damage. Now you nerfed the per totem damage because you're now using the support, which cuts down the damage per totem, essentially, but you are gaining an entire other totem, so it is a lot of damage. And they bumped the 3% more damage to 5%, which, I think that if they wanted to do this, they should have bumped it more. This is not really super significant, but it is obviously going to be more significant with more totems, and the idea here is they're trying to get you to use more totems, it appears, by using multiple totem support. So, like, what I'm trying to say basically is that this would, for my Freezing Pulse build in particular, this would basically about even out, I think. Like, it would be very similar overall total DPS between adding 2 more totems and taking the nerf individual totem damage per gem, or for the gem, or using not using the gem if this is like how it was before, being able to summon the 2 totems and just forsaking the gem and putting another damage support gem in there, right? So it would be like somewhat close. It's not like we're talking about like one is a total DPS of like 1 mil and the other one's a total DPS of 400k. It's not something like that. I'm not going to try and distort the picture here, but I think beyond the damage aspect, there's other things to consider. Like, one of the cool things I always thought about Hierophant, especially when playing it with a cold build like Freezing Pulse, is that 4 totems felt to me in a lot of cases like it was enough coverage. And if you have enough coverage, in my opinion, especially with a freeze-based build, you would want to have less totems and have them do more damage individually, get higher freeze and chill percents on mobs. You know what I mean? And that was honestly a decision you could make. You could be like, okay, do I want even more coverage and go 6 totems? Because there are some things where having 6 totems would be better than 4 totems. Specifically things like Legion and stuff like that, breaking stuff out, for example. That could be a good thing for certain types of encounters like that, where you really want a lot of coverage. You want to maximize your coverage. So again, there's advantages and disadvantages to using 6 versus 4, right? And it made you think a little bit about like, how do I want to play this? You know what I mean? And you could still definitely use the like, if you wanted the 6 totems, there was nothing stopping you from using the multiple totem support with Hyro. It's just that there'd be a little bit of overlap in terms of that ascendancy thing. But what does that matter? You know what I mean about the place another totem, place multiple totems at once. Like, it ultimately wouldn't matter that there's a bit of overlap there. So, yeah, I think it just takes away player choice a lot. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't... now it's kind of clear cut where it's like, okay, for most builds, you're just going to want to use multiple totem support. Like, there's nothing else that you're going to want to use. And I really don't like that. And I feel like it's a direction the game's been going a lot lately, where it's like they're just trying to homogenize things, and I don't understand why. Like, to me, the beautiful thing about this game is like thinking of it's the whole trade-off aspect, right? Or do I want to use this, or I can do this? I can kind of get the same thing using multiple ways, and depending on which way I get to it, there's going to be certain strengths of disadvantages. Like my build might be better in certain areas, worse in certain areas. I think that's a really cool aspect of the game. And that's something that a lot of games in this genre are lacking. Like a lot of them are pretty much like the arcade style, like, okay, just kill a bunch of monsters and it's fun. But there's not any type of level of depth in terms of customization for what you want to do at your build. And I think that in this case, there was definitely like some level of customization here, and now it's pretty much just gone. It's like, okay, you're just going to use multiple totem support. It's just unequivocally better. So again, throughput damage wise, this is not like an end all be all in most cases. You know what I mean? For certain builds, this is like even like just the fact that they buff the damage per totem, like something like if you were gonna play what is it called, the Righteous Fire totem build, like this would be a buff, right? But that's like a super obscure situation because you don't really need in most cases to place 2 totems at once because they don't do like overlapping damage, if that makes sense. But in a lot of cases, this is just going to it's going to take away choice and agency from the player and how they want to play the game. So I think it's just bad. And there's pretty much like, again, like unless they do something super big to nerf the Ascendant Totem stuff, there's going to be no reason, in my opinion, in most cases, to play Totem on Hyro. Now, one other thing I wanted to address is like, with this not being as good anymore, some people are going to say, well, you can go something else. Like, you can go Sanctuary of Thought, and you could go Arcane Blessing. Now, Sanctuary of Thought is not a bad node at all. But I don't think that it really... Like, my thing is, like, unless you're playing something with AoE, there's really no reason to go this. And even then... you see this and you see, oh, up to 100% AoE. Okay, that's like, that's kind of big. And then, but you have to like really consider that basically like at like 2k mana, which is probably what you're going to be around realistically, right? You're getting basically around like 40% AoE because you're going to be in that area. You know what I mean? You're going to be anywhere from like probably like 1700 mana to like 2300 mana. 2400 mana. So you're not going to be getting anywhere close to this. Like you see this and you're like, oh, juicy, 100% AoE. That's going to be insane. And then cost of skills, reservation. But in reality, it's not going to be as good as that, most likely. And, 20% of maximum mana as energy shield is great. But again, this is not necessarily going to be a situation, especially for totems where you're going to be stacking a ton of mana, necessarily. You know what I mean? Now, Arcane Blessing, you could go Arcane Blessing. Here's the problem with Arcane Blessing. So when you have Arcane Blessing from this, it's giving you the base, right? Arcane Surge, rather. So it's 10% more spell damage, the cast speed, and the maximum mana regenerated per second for 4 seconds. So you're getting 50% effective Arcane Surge, but it's working off the base 1, unless I'm misunderstanding something. Like, I think basically if you were to have... if you were to like cast Arcane Surge from your Flame Dash or something, and then your totems hit stuff, it's gonna take the one from your Flame Dash because it's gonna like override it when it gets cast. I'm not sure about that. If it doesn't do that and you can still use like one on your character, this is pretty decent. Like if that one stays, if the highest one stays. But even if that is the case, this is not like a insane node by any means whatsoever. But it's definitely better than if it would only proc off of the base. Because if it only procs off of the base, then at this point, it's kind of like attaching one to your Flame Dash at like a level, like a level 7 or 8 one, and bouncing around the map is basically the same, because 50% of the lowest one is not, 50% of the lowest one's not that good. So, yeah. So basically, my thoughts on Hyro, basically nerfs. I can see where they don't think it's like a nerf. There's like ways they could like rationalize certain things, but in my opinion, it's basically a nerf. Like, again, nobody, like, this is not going to be... it'll probably still be played a lot in the sense that people who are going to play totems just think of Hierophant as the totem ascendancy. For new players, and I think a lot of totem players tend to be new players to some extent because they are kind of like easier starter builds, even if the end game stuff is not as great on them. So they tend to attract new players sometimes. And new players will definitely be drawn to Hierophant still because it's the base totem ascendancy. It gives you a lot of stuff that you need. It gives you the +1 extra totem. It gives you the placement speed, the duration. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of good things about Hierophant from just a quality of life standpoint, for sure. So I think a lot of people will still play it, but I think people who know what they're doing will play Ascendant. Again, unless Ascendant's nerfed. And, yeah. I think that pretty much sums it up. One last thing I wanted to touch upon is they mentioned that, like, the 50% totem placement speed, because you're gaining it, right, because you get 100% now, is, like, some type of huge thing. This build already has so much placement speed, because the individual nodes give placement speed. In some cases, some people, you're going to pick up at least a little placement speed on the tree. Some people pick up the placement speed cluster, depending on, like, exactly how they're building. There's multiple placement speed clusters. I don't pick them up because I feel like they're not needed. But you can pick those up. If you really needed to, you could put it on your boots. You know what I mean? Unless you're using unique boots. In my opinion, the placement speed is number one, not needed. Number two, there's a lot of ways you can get it if you really wanted it. You can put it on Amulet too, I think. So I'm not, like, the 50% extra placement speed here, I don't know, I'm not swooning over that. It's not special to me. I'll put it that way. So yeah. I think that's pretty much about it. I don't want to drone on and on for no reason, but basically, Hierophant rework, not very impressed at all. Yeah. So, thanks for watching, and talk to you guys later.